Tonight's speech also has significant political stakes. Less than 2 months, of course, before the midterm election. The president's approval rating, now look at it, sits at just 40%, dragged down specifically by views of his handling of foreign policy. That number at roughly 32% of Americans who approve of his performance, an all-time low. For the first time, President Obama is less popular than former President George W. Bush. Republicans lead Democrats by nearly 20 points on which party better handles foreign policy, and by nearly 40 points on which party ensures a strong national defense. The White House says that Chuck Todd is the moderator of Meet the Press and NBC's political director. He's joining us today from New York. Chuck, give us a sense. We're seeing a huge shift in public opinion in these polls from 1 year ago when the president last gave a primetime speech on Syria. What in the numbers do you see as driving that?
Well, it's certainly different circumstances and a different type of threat here. And the president finds himself actually in an unusual situation for presidents. Normally, when you ask for prime time, you're trying to rally the country by your side on a specific issue. This is a case, as you and I were discussing before, of the reverse. The country's already there in what they'd like to see as far as going after this terrorist group ISIS, both in Iraq and Syria, and they're almost waiting for the president to agree with them. So on one hand, as far as public opinion is concerned for his strategy, he doesn't have a heavy lift. Now, politically, this is actually a big moment for him, a big moment for the Democratic Party. He's got to meet this moment. His party desperately needs him to meet this moment. Obviously, his own personal numbers have just taken a huge hit. But the biggest change, it's this issue, and you talked about it in the intro, it's this issue of the beheadings that really galvanized the country in a way much differently than a year ago when we were talking about going after Assad's chemical weapons. It didn't seem like in America's national interest. You kill 2 Americans, and America's decided it's in their interests.
So let's put some of these figures up on the screen right now. When asked whether military action in Syria is in the U.S.'s national interest, as you've been talking about, 61% right now say yes. That number was 21% in August of last year. Unsurprisingly, there's also a big gap between the parties when it comes to military action here on this, in terms of military action in Syria. Here's a figure that helps give us a better understanding of where things break down there. Military action against ISIS, airstrikes only, Democrats 49%. Airstrikes and combat troops, Republicans are more inclined to say 47% of them. So is it unlikely that, does this sort of indicate the president's less likely to face any real opposition, at least from Republicans?
I don't think he's going to, or frankly, many Democrats. I think Democratic lawmakers are closer to where rank-and-file Republicans are on this issue. Think about the letters that Al Franken has sent. You know, this is not exactly, I think it's across the board as far as the Democratic leadership is concerned and key Democratic senators. But I think it's more remarkable that in a country that clearly has war fatigue and has been tired of doing this for the last here we are about to be at the 13th anniversary of 9/11, that you still had nearly half of Republicans willing to send combat troops into this situation in Syria, and you had 1/4 of Democrats. I actually look at those numbers and say, wow, that just shows you the power of these attacks on these 2 American journalists.
You know, Chuck, one thing that you've been talking about over the course of this day as you sort of examine these poll numbers is just how far the president's approval rating has fallen when it comes to foreign policy. It wasn't too many years ago that he was celebrated on this topic. He thought it was a strength when he went up against Mitt Romney, of course, after taking out Osama bin Laden. The numbers show that has changed dramatically.
It has, and all of his erosion, though, is from Democrats, which gives him an opportunity, right? It is tonight, you know, in the interview with me on Sunday, the president talked about he doesn't do the theater of the presidency very well. This is a moment he has to do the theater part of the presidency very well. Kay Hagan in North Carolina, Mark Pryor in Arkansas, Mary Landrieu in Louisiana, they're counting on him because among the more stunning numbers here, this wasn't a judgment about just President Obama on foreign policy. You're seeing a trickle-down effect. The brand of the Democratic Party on the issue of foreign policy, on the issue of a strong national defense, has been damaged, at least temporarily, by the president here. Because there's really no other other issue that has come up that somehow hits the Democrats in addition to the president. So this is a huge moment for him that he has to meet on the commander-in-chief front.
So you're talking politics. Let's talk midterms if we can. 2014 elections less than 2 months away now. I want to get a sense of your takeaways from that poll when it comes to where voters are right now. You're seeing a shift in favor of the GOP. Let's put up some of these numbers on the screen right now. This is what Americans are saying in terms of the right direction, wrong track figures. 23% of Americans say we're headed in the right direction. 67% say the wrong track.
You know, you look at the last few midterm elections, and we haven't had a president's job rating this low at this point in time. Believe it or not, the president's job rating is a little bit lower than where President Bush was in 2006 at this time. And granted, it was right around the 9/11 anniversary, and he used to get some bumps on that front. That just tells you, though, I think the Democrats are sitting right on a tipping point. There's still not a lot of evidence that this could be a big wave election in favor of the Republicans. There's an enthusiasm issue. Interest in the election is still waning. There is this sense that the country doesn't think that the election matter, whatever happens, that it's really going to change things in Washington. However, take the state numbers that we had earlier this week, Kentucky, Arkansas in particular, couple them with what we see nationally, and you could see the Democrats are on a knife's edge here. And if it doesn't take much for suddenly Republicans to be on the precipice of a 5 or 6 seat Senate gain to 8 or 9 Senate seats. And this is why tonight, you hate to say that a foreign policy speech about Syria and ISIS somehow impacts November, but given the president's standing, given his party's standing, it's a huge moment for him, and his party needs him to step up because it's one of those, it's sitting at the knife's edge, and it could go to wave pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think you're exactly